Well, it's good to be here. Actually, you know what? It's great to be out of Sacramento and with people who are normal for a change. I think what Joanie was trying to express, a lot of us Republicans these days are people of faith. And I told Joanie, I said, it's kind of good because we go to these different clubs around California and we see some people who we recognize from the GOP and we get to know them, but also those of us who are people of faith, I said, we'll actually be spending eternity with them. So we're fighting here on earth, but hopefully we win. Because I don't like being pushed around, folks. So today there's two things. I don't have all the answers to life. You'll certainly figure that out pretty quickly. But I do have strong opinions which I want to share. And two things that we've been told throughout history that we shouldn't talk about is religion and politics. But a casual view of history clearly shows that the majority of the time that men oppress other men are through those institutions. And then they either send them into 1,000 years of bondage or set them free. So I think we'll talk a little bit about faith and politics today. But also, another person who supported this was George Washington. When asked why the prosperity and the success of America overnight, he said it's because it's the first time in human history where the best of Athens came together with Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the home of faith, and Athens, the home of politics. So again, he was the one who said America was great because of religion and politics. And so I want to share some of those things. But the first thing I think you guys know, who here has heard of Hillsdale College? Yeah, so a lot. So Dr. Larry Allen, I love the guy. He used to be in Claremont, mentored me years ago. Our two sons ended up in Hillsdale College, and they learned a lot of the good things about the Constitution as well as faith, and it grew who they were as human beings. But Dr. Arndt says he believes we've entered the third great American crisis, and that's whether we're going to maintain our constitutional way of government for freedom or descend into a despotic government ruled with force and fear, especially against people of faith and the free markets. And so, those are things that we should be concerned about. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
So today, I want to ask the question, what do we as patriots do? People of faith, people who are parents and grandparents, what is our responsibility to the next generation? Remember, Solomon said that the duty of a father is to leave an inheritance to our children's children, which goes beyond just the financial aspect, but also of, God, country, and healing our families. And so those are what I'd like to discuss today. I'd like to discuss some of the challenges, but also the solutions, because I don't want to spend too much time on the challenges. We pretty much know what they are, but I'll name a few that are highly offensive to me, because this is the first time in my life where I think the majority of our foundations are fractured. Before it'd be one or two things. It just seems like everything's sort of falling apart right now. And so, divorce rates are up, and of course we know studies show that the majority of men in prison come from fatherless homes. Young girls that get into prostitution usually do so because they had daddy issues. So, it's important to have a family that's united and stays together. A strong, stable family will make for a strong America. Also, this transgender affirming surgeries, isn't that a nice word, affirming? And yet we have these drag queen hours in our school. Think about this. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Grown men. Trust me, it's not the first graders calling them to come in and dance, right? These grown men call the schools and say, we want to come in and dance and dress provocatively till you're 5 and 6 years old. Those people have dark souls, and that's evil what they do. But what's even worse is we actually have schools that are letting them into those campuses. And so we have to guard the hearts and minds of the next generation. And as we go back in history, whether it was Lenin, Stalin, or Mao, you get to the youth, and then the next generation comes up. They're the ones that sort of control the country and what's going on. So we have a lot of work to do. But the good thing is it doesn't take numbers when you have faith. God used 2 men one time to chase 10,000 people down. And if you remember the story of Gideon, what he had 30,000 people. God says keep getting rid of them until he got down to about 300, and then they conquered tens of thousands of those guys. So it's more about faithful people. So I'm glad, honored to be able to be here to speak before you this morning. So thank you. And you know, I think about this transgender thing at a time. Our educational system has fallen apart. In some ways, I mean, remember, California used to be #1, and America was #1 in education. But as government grew, we had the Department of Education. As government moves further away from the people, it usually does worse. That's why the founders wanted to keep government and live in it. But now we are approaching some statuses of almost third world nations. We're 38th in math. Can you believe that? You know, in literature, we're down around 24. And so we've got a long way to climb up out of that hole so that our children can compete in a global society, not be dumbed down. So again, there's a lot of challenges. I worry about these threats from Russia and China. I don't think very many Americans realize these guys are threatening us, you know what I mean, flying their jets past our jets. And it's at a time when our recruiting in the military is at an all-time low. Did you know that? But what are they learning? Are they learning how to fight and defend America, or are they learning the proper pronouns? You know, so it's naive, it's wrong, it's evil, and you know, we're told about those things too. Congressman Fisher in Ames in 1805 said, "All of history lies open for our warning, like a churchyard whose solemn lessons are chiseled in the hard stone of eternity. Lessons that thunder to republics, your passions and your vices forbid you to be free." Also took a look at the Old Testament. Moses and the children of Israel are leaving 430 years of captivity under the Egyptian pharaohs. Moses, in that book of Deuteronomy, it has 34 chapters. But yet in those 34 chapters, Moses reminds, or I should say warns the children of Israel that you're going to be given prosperity. But over 50 times he says to be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. To make sure you follow those moral laws, decrees, and commands. That'll make your country, allow your country to have prosperity, fresh streams of water, plenty of food, and the peace and safety to enjoy it. But he says anything contrary to that, especially in morality, he says that'll become the death of the nation of Israel. So, you know, history is there to us to learn from. And so I think the thing is we're at a point where it just seems like we're getting hit on all sides. And so I'm convinced we can win, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. But in the meantime, I am concerned that we have some rough seas ahead of us. I think in the short term, we've got some challenges to do, and we may be called on, you know, to give the same ounce of devotion to our country as the founders did when they signed off that last paragraph of the Declaration of Independence with a firm reliance upon the protection of divine providence. We mutually pledge each other our very lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And as I've worked hard to save money for retirement all my life, I'm realizing that with 87,000 armed IRS agents, we may not be able to count on that money, right? That's nothing more than a despotic, communistic way of doing business in this country. And so we have to ante up and give everything, again, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor if we're going to pull this out for our country and for future generations. And so, but here's some things why I think there's hope for America. Samuel Adams, who was the father of the Revolution, said that we shall never be abandoned by heaven while we act worthy of its aid and protection. And for some reason, I've read this comment before, but maybe I'm a little slow. You would have thought with the 7 years I spent in high school, I'd be a little bit quicker to pick up on things. But it's conditional. He's saying as long as we act worthy, then heaven will hear and help us, right? And I was thinking the same thing. I was asked to speak at the Menifee National Day of Prayer breakfast here a few weeks back, and the theme was the fervent prayers of the righteous availeth much. So I looked up the word righteous. It means people who are representative of God, who follows divine law. And then Joanie looked up the word fervent, which means we have to pray passionately with intensity. So what I realized to save our country, again, this is conditional. We have to pray with intensity and with passion, and we have to be people who follow the moral law, and that's a condition for God to bail us out of the jam we're in, I think. And so that's why I believe there's hope, because there's still a lot of great people in America. We are the silent majority, but sometimes we're too silent, and that's another thing I want to speak on in a moment, on how we're going to get out of trouble. And that brings me to, over the years when I've spoken, people ask me, what can I do to help our country? Well, joining this club's a good thing. As Beth said earlier, walk for candidates. I had 50, 40 people walking for me, getting signs in front yards. It's one of the main ways I won that election. So there's many things we can do, right? But the number one thing, because I just wanted to be able to come up with what's the most important thing we can do. And I think we keep silent. And when we keep silent, it only emboldens darkness, folks. And so we have to use our words. I've spoken to so many people over the last couple of years who, after COVID, they were going to go to their in-laws' house or their outlaws' house and have dinner, and they said, but we can't talk about religion and politics. You know, it's the only thing we want to talk about, right? And so I thought about this, and the reason this politically correct speech is around, it's been around for millennials. They just call it different things. But what it's there for, it means they want to shut us up. And the reason they do is they know in their souls they cannot win the argument. But we fall prey to that. Like, we have to be nice, peace, love, and tranquility, so we fall into that and we keep silent. Silent, again, only emboldens evil. So when I thought about that, I thought about some of the great people, the difference between an ordinary politician and a statesman. And here's the difference. The statesmen always take on the most difficult issues of the day, you know? And I wish the same thing with pastors. I go to church, I like the church I go to, but a lot of churches out there, they've become user-friendly, seeker-sensitive, culturally irrelevant, and they don't want to take on the tough issues. And yet, Alexis de Tocqueville, in his book, Democracy in America, said, I searched for the greatness of America. He was sent here by the French government, and he said, I noticed it was not in her vast commerce or her ample rivers or her mines or her agriculture, and he just lists all these things. He says, it wasn't until I entered the churches that I saw the pulpits were aflame with righteousness. And he says, America's good, great because America's good, and when she ceases to be good, she'll cease to be great. And another comment that is attributed to him, but I haven't found where it was, adds on, but if the pulpits are no longer aflame with righteousness, could it be that the people will no longer know the truth? So I'm on the board of Arizona Christian University, and we just got George Barnett, who does polling for churches. And it's a pretty sad state of the church. Only 13% of our youth in high schools actually believe in moral absolute truth. So we've got a lot of work to do. The good news is you're here. We got enough in this room to take this valley, I'm convinced, if we do the right things. So anyway, we can't be silent. And I want to just talk about two statesmen who I really have a lot of appreciation with. Winston Churchill, right, was sort of booted out of Parliament because he had read Hitler's book Mein Kampf in the 30s and knew Hitler's plan to conquer the world. But the British people, they just came out of World War I, and they didn't want war, so they booted him out. He traveled and would talk to groups as small as 5 people, ladies and gentlemen, making his case, making his case. Finally, when Hitler showed his true colors and invaded Czechoslovakia and then was headed for France, the British people drafted Churchill, I mean, because he spoke out. They knew. So sometimes when we speak out, it's not always popular, but eventually we win, just like Churchill won. But the one I really appreciate is Abraham Lincoln. In 1857, Dred Scott, a slave, made his way all the way to the Supreme Court to win his freedom. And the Supreme Court ruled, no, you're someone's personal property, therefore this is the law of the land. But Lincoln runs the next year for U.S. Senate against Stephen Douglas, and that's his issue. He takes, here it's law of the land, he takes on slavery, and he loses that election. So he comes back 2 years later to run for president, and I don't think the Republican establishment probably wanted him because it was a losing issue. And the reason I say that is the first round of votes, Seward won, but not enough to secure the nomination. The second round of votes, Seward won again, but not enough to secure the nomination. Finally, on the third round of votes, took 3 rounds, Lincoln finally wins, He secures a nomination for the Republican nominee, goes on to win the presidency, and we know what history says about that great man. And again, it's because he took on the most difficult issue of the day, which we have to do. But we have to understand how to speak articulately, and I think a good lesson is to look at some YouTubes by Ronald Reagan. He could say some tough things and always did it with a wink and a smile. And good man. Okay, so the next thing we have to do, we have to relearn. A lot of times we talk about the Constitution. I know when I was in the Senate, there was very few people. All my Republicans supported the Constitution, but they didn't really know what the thing actually said. So we, the people, because the founders would say we're the ones to blame, not the politicians, because that's why the Constitution starts out, we the people, and then later on it says government of, by, and for the people. In the Declaration of Independence, which the Constitution rests upon, according to Lincoln, first time this was ever written in a political document, it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. So it means we're the ones who are in control. Reagan used to say, look at it this way, the car is the government, the citizens are the driver. We tell the car which way to go, not the other way around. But today the car is telling us what to do. We have to put these politicians back into place and remind them they're there to be our public servants and not our masters anymore. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I only got 4 yeses on that.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, we have to do that, you know. And another thing too, I want to remind us that our government was supposed to be limited, because I get people saying things to me all the time about how they view the Constitution. Even when I was in the Senate, you know, there's 3 branches of government, right? But now people like Dr. Larry Arnn saying there's 4 branches of government, and the 4th is all these thousands of bureaucracies that's been created, which has more power than the other 3. But it was never meant to be that way. So I want to read from this famous book. Oh, it's my book. But Article 1, Section 8 says, Congress was only empowered to do 17 things. That's it. 8 of them concerning national defense, 6 about commerce, having government secure the rights of citizens and businesses, and not government. The remainder powers were only about the territories. Anything else over and above is government overreach, because we were meant to be limited constitutional government. And so today, I remember we were on the floor, and Melissa Melendez, remember her, senator? Her and I were the only 2 that voted against this one bill. It was to create another government agency. And all our fellow Republicans voted for it, because the name of it, they give these things great names which mean nothing, like, you know, we love the little children's act or something like that, or save the spider. What's that?
Puppies and buddies.
Helping, yeah. And so it had a cute little name on it, but it was just a big bureaucracy that they're going to spend a lot of money, which that's what government does. Nonprofits spend almost 80% of the money they get. You're not going to see that with these government agencies in California that are supposedly there to help people with the big salaries, lifetime retirements. You're lucky to spend 40 cents on a dollar. And so here we were as Republicans creating a new bureaucracy. And I remember she was so disgusted with that. But her and I were the only ones that saw through that pulling, and we voted no. We didn't lay off or kept quiet. Our no was no. So we have to relearn those, we the people, and we have to teach those to others, because there's a fence. They're after us to assault us. They even call these principles a living document. How many of you heard that? Here's what that means. It means truth changes. But there's a phrase in the Declaration, the 2nd paragraph says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, how did those truths get there? If you look at the previous paragraph, it said they got there by the laws of nature, and nature's God, meaning God takes and places self-evident truth in the history and human nature. And so that means our Constitution is not a living document. They, on the left, like to say what the guys meant 200 years ago doesn't necessarily mean what it means today. But it's based on the laws of nature and nature's God. And so I just want to tell you a cute little story you'll appreciate. And you probably won't really appreciate it. But there was a gentleman, Clarence Thomas, who was being confirmed the Supreme Court years ago, and he was asked by a senator from the East Coast, how are you going to make your decisions? Well, at one time, the laws of nature, nature's God, was taught in every law school in America up until the early 1900s. And so Clarence Thomas said, well, I'm going to make my decisions based on the laws of nature, nature's God. And when this senator heard this, the word God, he scoffed at Clarence Thomas and said, where did you get that from? This senator, whose name is Joseph Biden, had no idea that that was in the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. So President Bush, or Bush, not Bush, Trump, asked Dr. Claremont Hillsdale if he would help start the 1776 project to restore the Constitution. And here's what I'd like you to know. The first day on the job, Joseph Biden, from my understanding, his first executive order was to get rid of the 1776 Commission. So ladies and gentlemen, do you understand they have a warfare against us? They have a warfare against the Constitution. They have a warfare against freedom. I mean, these guys go to Davos and they want a one world government. They want a one world currency. You know, they want the United States to be equal with all these other things. So anyway, we've got a lot of things to do. But one of the most important things, and this is what happened, when I got out of politics, I was trying to think, how can I best serve my country? And I selfishly thought, well, let me serve my family first. So I did write this book, The Road to Restoring the Family, because I want my kids, we raised them this way, but I want them to reinforce to my grandkids and then eventually as they get older to apply these principles. And so what I did is I didn't write this book from my own wisdom. I was scared to do that. I borrowed that phrase from the Declaration of Independence, the laws of nature, nature's God. So I went back into history in every chapter and tried to discern what, stand on the shoulders of those people who possess a superior wisdom than myself. So when it came to politics, I looked to the Greeks like Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, or I looked to the Romans, Cato, or Marcus Aurelius. Then when it came to issues on faith, I stood on the shoulders of Thomas Aquinas, or St. Augustine, or C.S. Lewis, that type of thing. So I tried to use the wisdom of others rather than my own, and then I tied in the appropriate scriptures where I felt they should be. So I tried to make my case, I tried to bulletproof it because I want to give my kids and my grandkids and anybody else who would buy this book the best possible advice, everything from economically, financially, politically, morally. I have a chapter on gratitude, but also I hit education and choosing a college pretty hard because I'm concerned about the state of education in America. So those are two of my favorite chapters. And then I end with what is our duty as parents and grandparents to leave our kids an inheritance of freedom. So that chapter is titled Defending Freedom, and then in our civic responsibility. So if you do buy it, my whole purpose is I hope it enriches the lives of your families because, so anyway, that's my part and try to, Lord willing, help our country. So, but we do have to secure the family, right? We do. Okay, and so going on, I got just a few more points here. I do think there are some bright spots in America. I do. As Churchill said, perhaps things are on the move. You know, when Joan and I first started out, the homeschool movement was like this big. It's a huge homeschool movement. In Arizona, because our daughter lives in Arizona, she has 4 kids with 1 in escrow right now. And so, but they get $7,500 a student.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's a list. You have to spend it on, you can't spend it on trips to Hawaii, or else I'd move to Arizona and have more kids. No. But anyway.
California school choice.
What's that?
California school choice. Please support it. We actually are modeling ours
Education
through
Arizona.
after Arizona.
Well, anyway, it's good. And so, man, homeschool's booming over there because parents, I mean, it's just booming. And so there's all kinds of co-ops you can join. And it's awesome. And then they've got the charter schools, Hillsdale, I think, has helped charter about 60 or 70 or 80 charter schools. And so people they want their kids to learn. And that's another bright spot. Think about this, guys. San Francisco recalled 3 school board members, that liberal city. And this is the first time in all of our lives that you see these young parents returning to school board meetings across the United States, America, saying, we don't want our kids indoctrinated. We want them to learn like math, science, and literature, and those types of things. This is a movement that's that is going to help America, folks, and we're seeing this. So this is a good thing that I want to remind you of. And in fact, a friend of mine, Pastor Tim Thompson, 412 Church out in Marietta, you guys know him?
Sure.
So there in Temecula and a few towns around Marietta, there were 7 openings for school boards this last election. He recruited 7 candidates. He went out and raised $300,000 and won 5 out of the 7 seats. And yeah, that's something to clap for. Another thing too I want to share, our son, forgive me for bragging, but I like to brag about my family. David ended up at one time working for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, so when he got to the White House, Trump appointed him to help find constitutional judges. So I know this firsthand. That administration found over 200 constitutional judges that were appointed to the federal bench, ladies and gentlemen. So anyway, there's a lot going on, except for the Dems want to, have what, 80 people on the Supreme Court now. So, and I kind of knocked pastors a little while ago. I should have maybe filtered that a little bit better. Over the last 5 years, I don't know what's happened, but I've had the opportunity to go speak to different groups and conferences of pastors, and I've been able to have the honor of speaking over 12,000 pastors, and I give them this speech. It's pretty hardcore about we got to get involved with politics, and it's seems to be received somewhat warmly because I get invited back, which is surprising to me. So that's a good thing, right? Because some of these churches are 40 people. One pastor has 8,000. Another pastor I spoke to has over 10,000 people, and 500,000 people are watching online. So, so maybe God's on the move. We have to look at those private. Another thing too, 5 million more Republicans last election voted than Democrats. I looked this up for you. In the state legislatures, we control 54% of them compared to the Dems 44%. Governors, we control 28 to the Dems 22. So there's still hope. But the one I like is Governor Youngkin in Virginia. In a Democratic state, he won a Republican because he went hardcore on the issues on education and crime, that we're supposed to protect and watch over our law enforcement, and we need to put these guys in jail, and our kids have to start learning. Democratic state, he wins, but he knew the right message, and he had the boldness to talk about that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in America. A couple other things too, as I get ready to think about some closing thoughts. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who remembers who he was? He was a German pastor. In 39, he was in New York in a cushy seminary, but he felt that Christians should be where the flames are the hottest, so he went back to fight against Hitler, right? And so I think, where are the flames the hottest in the United States? California. As California goes, so goes the nation, right? And so if you haven't U-hauled it out of here, perhaps God has a purpose for us to stay here, and that's to change our state. What state better to fight for, and who better to advocate for than our children, our family? And so we have a duty, right? And it's a high calling, and I'm just glad you're here. So also, I want to also go back and just think about why I think this is important, because of the rich heritage California has. Think about that. We're the only state with 21 missions. Think about that, 21 missions. The city of Sacramento means the city of sacraments, Holy Communion, Holy Matrimony, focused on the family, Campus Crusade, World Vision, all founded really right around this area right here, right? And so Billy Graham too, in San Bernardino Mountains, went to a retreat when he was a young man and was there. He was convicted to preach the gospel. Then we had the Azusa Street revival years ago that produced 69 million Pentecostals. And Joanie and I were recently up on the Santa Barbara area, and she saw that sign, Highway 1, El Camino Real, which means the highway of the King. And so, you look around, this was God's state at one time. And folks, I'm convinced he wants the state back, but it's us to do it. So let me close with a quote from Sir Winston Churchill. And remember, those days were darker then than what we have today. Because if you remember the London Blitz, London was being bombed for 57 consecutive nights by the Nazis. The Brits were pretty sure they were going to lose that war. in Churchill, when everybody else was in bunkers, he was out watching the city get bombed. I don't know if he was crazy or if he was just trying to instill confidence, but I love that man either way. I think he was a great leader. But the words that he says that I want to read for their dark days, I think are very appropriate for us today to leave here with this wisdom from Churchill. So I'll read this and I'll close with it. You ready? Here's what Sir Winston says. Our future and that of many generations is at stake. We are sure that the character of human society will be shaped by the resolves we take and the deeds we do. We need not bewail the fact that we have been called upon to face such solemn responsibilities. We may be proud and even rejoice amidst our tribulations that we have been born at this cardinal time for so great an age and so splendid an opportunity of service here below. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys for having me.